Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coaches Corner Health. I'm excited today. We're continuing our discussion on around dating, the dating professional. Last week we talked about dating, our defining our relationship and navigating the journey of dating, and today we're going to dive into this realm further and talk about empowering your love story by mastering the art of healthy boundaries and what does that look like. But before we get started, let me tell you who I am. I'm Leslie Cadet. I'm a self-care coach. I believe that it's the lifeblood. Self-care is the lifeblood for our success in life and business, and it's why I help my clients prioritize self-care in their daily lives to support them in their lifestyle, so they wake up with more energy, more focus, more intention to tackle their daily activities with confidence and to show up in their business and serve their clients powerfully. So I'm here with my co-host Andy, and I want you to tell us who you are.
Hello, Leslie. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Leslie, for your introduction. I love it every time. It sends shivers down my spine every time. I love hearing it. Hey, everybody. I am Andy Lidstone, the unconditional coach. I I help people with boundaries, which is today's discussion. Um, I help people with relationships and control issues and all kinds of other things as well. And generally speaking, boundaries is how I do that. So I'm really excited about today's discussion. It's something that's been central to my journey, to my coaching for several years now. So this is something I'm really looking forward to. Um, yeah, let's dig in. Let's dive right in and start talking about boundaries. First of all, why don't you tell me what your experiences with boundaries have been over the years, Leslie?
Yeah, well, I'm actually excited to dive into this as well because this is your area of expertise, and I'm really excited to what you're going to be sharing with us today. So, yeah, my experience around boundaries. The typical. I think it's the typical way that people look at boundaries is, well, this person's doing this, so I'm going to put up this boundary to keep them from doing that, not recognizing there's differences, what boundaries really are. There's boundaries and barriers and all of that. So I grew up with that whole mindset around, like, okay, this person, as an example, somebody might have hurt me in a certain way, and so I decided that I wasn't going to spend time with them, and putting up, like, ways to keep them away, thinking that was a boundary. And I did that pretty much my whole life until I started really diving into and learning about, like, really, how does that align with being, what I do, being a self-care coach for one, but how does that even align for a healthy life, like a healthy lifestyle, if my boundaries, all I'm doing with my boundaries, what I was doing was to keep people away or keep things from happening. And so I wasn't really looking at it from the perspective that there was other ways to really, like, look at, like, what is an actual boundary, and what and how that serves you, and looking at, like, the barriers. And these are some of the things that you obviously touch on a lot with your clients. So that's really, like, my experience.
Yeah, that was my experience early on as well. Before I really started developing this new concept, um, it was people were doing things I didn't like, or I was being hurt or negatively affected in some way, and I was taught by psychiatrists and therapists and counselors, friends and family, all kinds of people to, well, you need to set better boundaries, you need to have healthy boundaries. And so to dig into that, I read the original Boundaries book by a couple of guys named Cloud and Townsend, and they really helped me to separate what was my responsibility and what was not my responsibility, and which helped me to, you know, as you said, to set up boundaries to keep bad things from happening in my life, from keep to keep people from doing bad things or harmful things that hurt me. The problem is that exacerbated another problem I had, as I've mentioned a few times on this channel, I grew up with little to no friends at all. So as I started setting boundaries and preventing people from having access to my life, that was not exactly helping me make friends. You know, if somebody did something I didn't like, then I just stopped hanging out with them, which meant I was more and more lonely. So it didn't take long at all for me to decide, well, boundaries suck. I hate this concept of keeping people away out of my life, right? So eventually, a few years ago, I came up with this idea of there's got to be a way to use boundaries to build relationships instead of using boundaries to prevent relationships. Um, now, I don't think that the original authors of the boundaries book were trying to prevent relationships. They were trying to create healthy relationships, and I didn't understand how they were doing that by keeping people away. With my new concept that I call unconditional boundaries that use what I now call bridges and barriers, um, I found a way that one of the versions of boundaries, which is barriers, do keep people away, but they don't keep all the people away. They only keep people away who would potentially be harmful to us. And I don't mean they've done a bad thing or they've done a hurtful thing, because just about everybody's done a hurtful thing. We all accidentally hurt each other on occasion. I'm sure you and I've even done that. But what barriers do in relationships is they help us create a distance in relationships where people have a habit of harming us or continually harm us or have potential for great harm. They help us. Barriers help us avoid abusive relationships. Barriers help us avoid toxic people. And I wanted to define a couple of things here. Toxic people, in the context of unconditional boundaries, aren't actually a bad person, a person who's harmful all the time. A toxic person in context of unconditional boundaries is simply somebody whose values are so opposite to yours as to be harmful. An example I would use is, um, let's say that I valued security, personal security, my own security. A toxic person would be somebody who values um, openness to the point where nothing is a secret. There is no there is no hiding anything from anybody, not just our significant partnerships or our significant relationships, but I would tell anybody anything about my life. And so somebody who values secrecy or privacy as somebody else who values complete openness would be toxic to the person who values secrecy. It's not that either one of those are dangerous. Privacy or secrecy is not dangerous. Being completely open isn't dangerous if you surround yourself with people who have similar values. But those two people would be toxic for each other. So when I talk about toxic people, I don't mean about they're toxic to everybody. They're just toxic to people who have directly opposed values. Um, so barriers do help us keep that away. But the original concept that I based it on was what I used to call boundaries, but now I've changed the word to bridges to be a little more clear about what I'm talking about. What I've what I've learned how to do is to share my values in such a way that people who align with those values, who have the same or similar values, choose to be in relationship with me, choose to be my friend, my partner, my romantic partner, my coworker. You and I, we have discovered that a lot of our values are similar or the same, which means we've made great partners for this show, for this YouTube channel. There's a lot of values we have in common, some that are different, and we've discussed many of those on this channel. But we don't have any values that are toxic. We don't have any values that are so opposite as to be hurtful to each other. We do have some values that aren't very compatible, but they're not hurtful to each other. And most of our values are at least similar, and in many cases, actually very much the same value. There's a lot of things that we like that are the same thing, that we value that are the same thing. So when I started talking about bridges, I started talking about how to share our values in such a way that people who have similar or the same values can decide they're attracted to us. They're attracted to our value. They're attracted to the things that we want or the things that we do in our lives. They're attracted to that by what we say and what we do, by our words and our actions, because I believe both are equally important. So I created this concept called bridges and barriers. Bridges to invite people who share our values into closer relationship, and barriers to prevent people who have opposing values from getting too close to us. And that's the kind of concept that I created around unconditional boundaries. I split them into two types of boundaries. And barriers are very, very similar to how a lot of us originally used boundaries, with one big difference. Many of us used our original boundaries as a way to keep people away, to, or to encourage them to do what we wanted, almost like a reward and punishment system. A lot of us used to use original boundaries or traditional boundaries to help people, like, for example, our husbands, our coworkers, our wives, our kids, to change their actions, to change the what they do and why they do things to be more in alignment with us. The what I How I teach bridges and barriers is they're not in any way designed to change people's activities. They're specifically designed to help us discover our own values and the value and see how the values of others uh, either work well with our values or are opposite, opposing to our values. So that's kind of the concept that I created specifically to help build relationships. Um, Now, I've shared this with you quite a while ago, so why don't you share with me what your thoughts are on this concept and what your experiences have been as you've tried using them.
Yeah, so no, I like the idea of what you had brought up about the differences of using the boundaries, whether it's through bridging relationships to improve upon them, to get closer, or having those barriers in place so people don't get too close, or to, sometimes those barriers, they can be used for people who are, those the ones who are energy drainers. So you know, maybe they're the type of people that you end up on a conversation with, and every conversation is around complaining about something or gossiping around something. And so you've decided at some point that this is not the ideal conversation that you want to have. And so you give them I don't know if it's an ultimatum, but you give them like a time limit. You give them, like, you say, look, we're going to talk about this for, like, say 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to move on to something else because we've kind of revisited this already before. It's not really going anywhere, and that becomes your first step, I think, into creating, whether it's that boundary where you're, sort of like a barrier where you're creating that space between how much time you're allotting to this type of talking. And then when that person decides that they're either going to go along with it or not, if they say yes, then great, you can continue on and you now shift your conversation elsewhere. But if they continue on in the same fashion, that's when then you create that time, like, okay, I only really have this much time to talk to you today. So, like, instead of it usually it would be an hour or 30 minutes, we're gonna cut it down to 15 because that's really all the time I can spare for this. Not necessarily telling them that it's because of their negative behavior, but you're only giving them that time limit because you understand that you're have to protect yourself in a way that you're not getting drawn into that. So that's kind of like what I've learned around the differences about, that bridging and also like the protection piece around the barriers. Um, so I've kind of really, before we really even met, I really kind of started understanding the differences around, for me, what I was looking at boundaries was really about, I looked at it as sort of like a protection around my time and not meant to keep people away, but was just so that I would honor the self care space that I created for myself. So that's how I was using boundaries. And so, having, for example, right now my door is closed. It has a note on it that says I'm on a call, I'm on a live video or on a call. So that's like having that, it's like having that boundary that's not meant to keep my husband away. It's just meant to say, hey, right now, this is what I'm working on. And that allows my time to be honored based on what I'm doing. That also expresses to him, like, this is what I'm doing. You don't have to read my mind. A lot of the time we think that someone has to, oh, we've been together long enough. You should know how I feel. You should understand the things that I want, my values. The only way person understands what you want and your values, your needs and things is with you communicating them. And over time, they're going to change. So you might one day decide something else is not something you're willing to have in your life. But the person in your life is not going to automatically pick up on that. It's about being able to communicate that. So yeah, that's kind of like how I use bound my understanding around it, how I started practicing it, even like before you and I started talking about on the unconditional boundaries. And I really do like your concept around it because I think people have been really using the I, the idea of barrier rather than an actual boundary to when they create boundaries around different aspects of their life. And like you were saying, the boundary is meant to bridge and bring a relationship together, but a barrier, like that's a hard stop. It's like you can't cross that line in the sand. So for you, your experience, like when you're making friends, or if someone along your journey hurt you, well then you've got this boundary in place. You don't want people around you, and yet you don't. It's not that you don't want all people around you. You just didn't want certain people around you, but you were putting everyone into that same category of like, this is it, you can't cross it. And so that didn't allow for you to have that, that those relationships that you did want. So I really like this new concept, and I think it's brilliant, that you've started creating this, and I know that you're helping your clients around this as well.
Yeah, this has been a major turning point both in my life and in the lives of the people that I help. Um, we generally start with trying to share what we want. I teach them, let's share what we want. Let's, like you said, communicate. Well, we've been together for 2 years. We've been together for 25 years. We've been together for 50 years. They should know. Actually, they don't. There is no way they could know because they're not inside your head. They might have heard your words. They might have heard your words 1,000 times, like literally 1,000 times. But that doesn't mean they understand what those words mean. That doesn't mean they understand the intricacies of your different moods, of your different values. They don't understand how the interplay of all the things in your head go on. So they're going to get it wrong the majority of the time unless you're openly communicating on a consistent and regular basis. Um, so that's the first step: is let's tell people what we actually want, and not in a vague, well, I want honesty, or I want integrity, or I want us to spend more time together, but in a very specific way. What do you want them to be honest about? Do you want them to tell you every time they've gone to the bathroom? Do you want them to tell you every time they've bought a coffee before going to work? Do you want them to tell you every time they buy fries for lunch instead of onion rings? Like, what kind of honesty do you want? Or do you want them to tell you every time they look at another person who is of the opposite sex or is of the same sex that you are? Are you so concerned about where their attention goes that you want to know where their attention's at every moment of the day, even when they're at work or out of your sight? Are you so worried about what they're thinking about that you want to always know what they're thinking about? Or do you mean by honesty that I want you to tell me if you've had an affair with somebody? I want you to tell me if you intend to buy a car. I mean, there's variations, right? When you say I want them to have integrity, do you mean you want them to be true to their values, or do you want them to be true to your values? When you say I want them to respect my privacy, are you saying you don't want them to talk about anything to do with you, or are you saying you don't want them to tell other people about your details? Like, what does that actually mean? So the first thing we talk about is by first of all defining what your values actually are in a very specific sense, and then how to communicate those with the people around you. Your partner first, your romantic partner first, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, that kind of thing, but also your family, your coworkers, your friends. How to communicate those. Because if you don't know A, what your values are, or B, how to communicate them, you're going to have a really tough time building any bridges. Building bridges to build closer relationships requires that A, you know what your boundaries are or what your values are, and B, that you understand at least basically how to communicate those. So when it comes to building healthy relationships, it starts with, what do you want? I was when I started getting into this work, into helping other people, I was blown away by how many people could not identify the basics of what they want. They would say things like, "I want to be treated with respect." Well, what does that mean? Or, "I want somebody who loves me." Well, how do you feel loved? Right? One of the biggest differences my ex-wife and I had is how we feel loved. Right? I wanted her to allow me to make mistakes. When I made a mistake and it was treated with compassion and understanding, I felt tremendous amounts of love. Whether it was a big mistake or a little one, whether I forgot to wash a pot properly and there was something left on it, or whether I, was having interactions with another woman that felt like flirting to her. Whatever the mistake was, I wanted to be forgiven for it. And if I was, I felt tremendous amounts of love. Whereas for her, love meant being true to only her, giving my attention only to her, not to my kids, not to my coworkers, not to my friends, but to her. That's how she felt loved. And therefore, our values weren't even compatible. What she wanted, I didn't want. What I wanted, she didn't want, in a lot of ways. There were some things that our values were compatible. We made great parents. We managed our money very, very well. A lot of the things that we did were very compatible, but there were some strong, important things that were competitive, that were so different as to not be compatible. And I didn't know about this concept. She didn't know about this concept. So we ended up building a relationship that turned out to be, I don't know if I'd call it toxic. She might have called it toxic, but it was at least competitive. It was at least not compatible. It might, and at times it did get dangerous. We did hurt each other. So if I'd have known about these concepts when I met her, we might have just stayed friends. instead of getting married. Because, like I said, there was plenty of things we had in common, but there was important ones we didn't. So when we're building healthy relationships, as we've talked about previously in the last series and in this series, the first part is to share your values with that person. If you understand your values and you understand how to communicate them, then you can set clear invitations into a deeper relationship. If you share this value with me, if you like date nights once a week with just you and me, then maybe we should get closer, get to know each other a little better. If you like walks in the park as a romantic evening, then perhaps we should get closer together. If instead of walks in the park, you enjoy playing video games, and that's what I enjoy, perhaps we should get closer together, right? Sharing what your values are is a way to invite people who share those values into a deeper relationship, whatever kind of relationship that happens to be. This is what I call bridges. They're invitations to deeper relationships. You build a bridge between yourself and that person. And just like a bridge, when you build a bridge, they don't necessarily come across the bridge. It's an invitation. And because it's an invitation, they don't have to accept. If they don't share your values, they shouldn't accept that invitation. And this is the point of bridges and barriers. The point of bridges is to send out these invitations to different people you think you might align with, and give them a chance to decide if they believe you align as well. And if both of you believe you align with your values, or that they're at least similar enough, then you can build a healthy relationship. And it's also a way for people who decide they don't have the same values as you, for neither one of you to invest in a relationship that's going to turn out not very great, right? Maybe you will be friends, but you'll stay casual friends, or you'll just stay friends instead of getting married, or you'll be coworkers, but you won't be intimate partners at work. You won't collaborate on everything. You'll just collaborate on things that you really have to, depending on how closely your values align. As you and I met in a group that I was hosting, and got to know each other amongst a bunch of other people, and as we interacted with the other people in that group and each other, we discovered gradually over time that there was some values in common, and over time more and more values in common. And this is how we sent out bridges and decided to cross those bridges and decided to build this collaboration, this partnership. And it happened gradually over time, which also helped us to gradually build trust. And that's what created this collaboration, this partnership. And it's been wonderful. Both of us have said so many, many times. And that's because we both sent out bridges and waited for those invitations to be either accepted or rejected. Right. And that's kind of the magic, the art of healthy boundaries.
Yeah, so I think that's great. I think so. Let's like segue now into someone who's dating, right? Because now they knew they were ready to date. They started looking. They started seeing that their values were aligning. They started to bring that person closer into a relationship to start nurturing it and building it. So through now someone is dating, this could possibly lead to something more serious. How do they navigate this new, because you go through that honeymoon stage, right? You go through that honeymoon stage of being in a relationship, and everything about that person is wonderful. You might see red flags, but they're okay, they don't bother me right now. But we know over time those little things might come back. So how do you help someone to really navigate their relationship from that place, like they're newly becoming exclusive, and now they're wanting to like really build that relationship? How do you help them with building those healthy bridges, if you will, to empower their love story so that it can become, if they decide over time, that long term relationship.
First of all, let me take my mute off or my mic off mute. Yeah, um, like I was talking about. It starts with first of all understanding what you want. As we talked about in the previous series on learning to date or getting out there and finding someone that you might be interested in, we talked about understanding what it is you want, really knowing who you are and what your values are and where you're coming from, right? If you understand what it is you're looking for, then it's much easier for you to build bridges in your relationships. You're going to you're going to try and in the early parts of your relationship, you're going to try and build bridges to those parts of you that you like the most, that you want to share the most. You'll build bridges to those values that you have that you think would attract their attention the most. You're going to share those things that you like that you think are similar to what they like. And you're gonna do that in those first few dates and those first few conversations and those first few up all nights talking on the phone together as you and your husband did. You're going to share some of those things. The things that really drive you are what you want or what you're looking for. Those are the first few bridges we build. We 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 tell that person, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I like this and I like that and I like that. And as we do that, and they say, yeah, I like that too, or I kind of like that, but I like this thing over here that's kind of similar. To use the security example, somebody might not want security, but they might want privacy, which isn't the same as security, but it's very compatible, right? It's very similar. So you can build relationships with someone like that, right? Somebody who wants honesty might be compatible with somebody who wants integrity, as long as they're very specific about what that means, right? If somebody who wants honesty wants to be told about all the major decisions in that person's life, um, and the other person wants integrity, in other words, they want to be in a relationship with somebody who always lives up to their values, always shows their values in their actions and in their words. Um, those relationships can be compatible as long as the other values are also compatible. So first of all, sharing, knowing what you want and sharing in those first few dates. And as you sit up all night talking, and as you go to the movies or sit on the couch or and snuggle or go for walks and spend, hours out in nature, or, go camping, or whatever the thing is, whatever you do, the time you spend together, if what you're doing is trying to show off your most valuable values, most important values, you're trying to share the things that are most important to you, this is how you build that relationship, because you're doing two things. You're inviting them to share your values, and you're showing them which values you want to share, so that the person who shares those values will want to get closer to you. And if they don't share those values, then you're not investing years and years into a relationship before you find out you don't have this thing in common. You're only investing whatever time it takes to share those values, right? It's a way to make sure that the people we do invest our time and energy into are people who actually will build solid relationships with us. So how I would do that is I would simply share, this is what I like, this is what I want. Be honest, be vulnerable, and really share the things that are important to you. And as you get further and further along, and they've said, yes, I like it when we go for walks in the middle of the night. I love it when we stay up till 3 in the morning playing video games. I really enjoy it when we go out for dinner a couple of times a week, and a couple of times a week we decide to stay home for dinner and cook for each other. I really like those things. When we decide we like those things, then it's time to start sharing the deeper values, the ones that are not so critical but still important. Maybe I do. Maybe playing video games together isn't a big deal. I like it, but it's okay if you don't. But then if you do like it, we become closer. Or or maybe stargazing in the middle of the night is something I enjoy, but I could do other things too. But if you enjoy it, now we're going to become even closer. So it's, as you get deeper into the relationship, it's about sharing more and more of those things that you have in common or that you want to have in common. The It's important to share the big ones first. Those things that are really important to you, those things that are kind of important to you, those things that maybe have come up in previous relationships, in previous friendships, maybe with your family, those things that have really left a gap in your relationship with that person when you didn't share those values. Share those ones early. Share those ones pretty early on so that if you run into somebody who doesn't share those values, you don't invest more time and energy than you need to. Maybe you stop the relationship at friendship. Maybe you stop the relationship at casual acquaintances. Maybe you don't get too close to this person because they only share some of your values. And that's fine. I have plenty of people that I hang out with that I only share a few values with. That doesn't mean we can't be friends. It just means we're never going to be as close as some of my close friends are. Say, like you and I are. There's only a few people that I let in that deeply because there's only a few people for whom my values have that much in common. Right. So it's a way to determine not just whether you have a relationship with this person, but how deep that relationship goes, how much time and energy you invest. To your point earlier, if somebody's using up your energy, that means there's some values that you don't have in common. Maybe they like to complain, maybe they like to gossip. That's something that they value. But if you don't, then that's where you put up a barrier and say, I can only give you this much time to do that. It doesn't stop you from having a relationship with that person, but it might stop you from getting too close. It might stop you from getting really, really close with that person. And that's kind of the point of when bridges become barriers, when some of those values aren't as compatible. Maybe you do have some values in common, but there's some that aren't. So you limit how close the friendship gets or how close the relationship gets. So that's how I would navigate that in a new relationship as we're building it. Share your values. Send out as many invitations as you can to help them get closer. And another point to that, how fast you go. People talk about we're going too fast in our relationships, or we're not going fast enough in our relationships. The speed at which you become closer is determined by how quickly you each send out bridges to the other. If you're going too fast, you're sending out too many invitations all at once, or they are. If you're going too slow, you're not sending out enough invitations. You're not sharing enough of your values. So, how much of yourself you share and how much you want, how many of their invitations you accept will determine how fast your relationship grows. So, if you want to slow things down, accept fewer of their invitations right off the bat, accept them later, take time. If you want to speed things up, send out more invitations, share more of your values. So that's what I would do when you're building a new relationship.
Yeah, I like that. And I think too, like the common denominator here is communication. The only way you can send out a bridge is you've got to communicate your needs. And so, and I think that's the whole part where a lot of relationships start to fall apart is they stop talking. They stop sharing what it is that they want, what they need. They stop listening to what the other person is sharing and what they need, and they stop being open to allowing for different perspectives. We're not always going to have the same opinion. We're in a relationship, right? We're human beings, individual. We're inside our own brains by ourselves. You don't, when you become in a relationship, you don't like start a melding of minds where you literally are in each other's head. It doesn't work that way. It's learning to be able to, to be able to listen and being able to like really allow yourself to listen to what the other person's sharing to see if those I ideal the bridges that are being presented to you, the ideas, the values being presented really are something that you like or you don't. And that helps you to create that bond, a deeper bond. And I think that's what was really great in my early relationship with my husband. As I've said many times on this channel, that I have been married over 27 years, and I think for us in the very beginning when we first met, we talked like 3 days in a row, like for hours, and we got to know each other. And I thought it was I look back at that and think how comfortable that was to be able to be talking to someone and just sharing about our lives and our values, as you would say. We were putting out bridges and maybe not necessarily understanding the concept of it, but we were talking about openly about what we wanted, our ideal for our lives, and got closer that way just through the conversations. And then when we met again, in the dating aspect of it, and started to really see like, oh, this person really, I like being around them. I like spending time with them and doing life, getting to know them more, and seeing how our lives can connect. And then, as we went through the very first 9 months of being together, we got engaged and then we got married. And so, but that was what I knew back then was, I had said this before, stepping into a new relationship, which I had when it was, meeting the man who would become my husband. I'd stepped out of a relationship not long before where it had been a long term relationship. And I didn't have these, even though I thought we had communication, I think my bridges were there more so than his. And I'm not saying this to blame him in any way or to say that there was anything, he was a really nice person, but over time things changed, our values changed. What my needs were really not being met, and they were not going to be met necessarily because it wasn't in alignment with where he saw our relationship going, and that's okay. But what I truly believe, like in this, when I did, meet the man who I would eventually marry, we had time to talk to each other and get to know each other, and to figure out whether or not we wanted to take it to the next level. Okay, let's go on the first date. Then, okay, do we getting to know each other in that respect? Because now we're face to face. Then, do we want to continue down this path? And finding that we did, and nurturing that, and you know, over the decades, it's not necessarily always been perfect. We haven't always had open communication, but the last 6 years have been better. We started, and that's because I recognized, we changed over time, but I didn't recognize that until I started going through my own self development journey and started working for you know, on myself, and that then started helping me to reintegrate that communication style of, as you were saying, building those bridges to create a deeper bond with my husband, and him him feeling seen, heard, and understood, and then him reciprocating that with me. And now we have better conversations. We're being more in alignment with what we want. Our values are starting to have really started to align again. So it's not just in the beginning, it's over your lifetime if this is a person you're going to spend your life with. But I think in the beginning, like you were saying, it's really important to share up front your big things, like the things that are really, like, I would say, non-negotiable. because those are the things that are then going to allow you to decide the new values that get introduced as you go through your relationship. Are these new values going to line up well with my remaining values? And can we continue? And I think that was what I learned just in my own relationship, because I knew right then going in what I did want. I did know what I wanted. I knew what I didn't want, but I also knew what I did want. And I think that's why we're doing these series on, helping you to get ready to date, and then helping you as you're going through the dating life, if it becomes serious and committed, uh, you know, how to navigate that.
Yeah, one of the things that you touched on that I really enjoyed is how you communicated early on, and then a few years ago you realized that you had you had lacked in that communication eventually in your relationship. And this is important when we're building those bridges early on in our relationship. There's two purposes to that. One, obviously, is to share our values so that we can decide how much we align, how much we have in common, how much we want the same things. But the second reason is to build a habit of sharing your values. Um, because when we get to that place where, oh, I've already shared everything, you already know everything I want, you already know all the things, and we decide we don't need to share that anymore, that's when we evolve, or they evolve, or typically both of us evolve, and some of our values change. And because we've already told this person our values, we just assume that as they change, they recognize it. So part of this building bridges, part of this communicating your values is building a habit of communicating your values so that over the course of your relationship, regardless of how long it lasts, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or whether it's 27 years, you build a habit of sharing your values, of talking about what it is I want. Because most of the time when our values change, there's subtle changes that we don't even recognize. So if we're talking about our values, eventually our language, our actions will evolve to be in line with our values. And if we're still talking about them, communicating them, both verbally and in our actions, then they'll recognize when our values evolve. Whoever we're in relationship with will recognize that our values evolve. And then they'll be able to see the revised invitation and decide if they want to continue that invitation. And if we've been married, if I've gotten married to this person, then there's a likelihood that they will choose to continue to accept the invitation, even with the revisions. But it's that communication. It's important to keep that communication open forever. It's not a point of it's, there is no point in your relationship where he knows enough or she knows enough about me. They know these things. No, they don't. Because I promise on a day to day basis, on a year after year basis, on over the course of your relationship, some of those things evolve. And on a day to day basis, what you want is specific is different. What honesty looks like on a Monday might not be what honesty looks like on a Thursday, right? What you want at the Christmas party for in the manner of integrity, what you want at the company Christmas party is not going to look like the same thing as what integrity looks like at the family reunion or at work or with the kids. It's going to be different. So it's important to be communicating your values all the time, communicating what it is you want all the time, your needs, your desires, your heartfelt wishes, all those things, your dreams. The more we communicate those things, the more that the other person in this relationship can decide how much they align with them, how much they want the same thing. And if at times you don't want the same thing, that's okay. It's how it's only a problem if what you want is so opposite as to not be compatible. If you and your husband decided one of you wanted to travel their life away and the other one wanted to settle down and have kids, there's a chance you might not have been married. There's a chance you might not have stayed married long. But that's the point, is because you did communicate that that's what you wanted and you both wanted to travel or at least not be stuck in one place, then you managed to build a life around that because that's what you wanted. So, this is how we create long term relationships. This is the art of healthy boundaries. Invitations. And the last thing I want to mention about invitations is they are invitations they can refuse. They are not demands, they are not expectations. Those are what barriers are for. If somebody's not meeting your needs, not not meeting your expectations, set barriers. If they are hard lines that you need them to do and they say no, that's going to cause a reduction in the relationship. Right.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think we kind of like covered it, and I think you
I
really
think we
just
did.
rounded it out. Yeah, this has been such a great conversation, Andy. I'm glad that you got to share on this because this truly is, I think, a really important aspect to creating that healthy relationship that's
I
going to
agree.
last. And again, it's not just starting. It's not in the beginning. It's through the lifetime of the relationship. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it has been. And thank you for participating in the conversation, sharing your wisdom as well, and the questions that triggered the right responses from me that could really get the point out. These conversations are brilliant every time, and to our audience, I really love that you guys get to witness these conversations that Leslie and I have, and I thank you for participating, for watching, and for being on these videos. Thank you for listening.
and and if you don't want to miss out on anything, just make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that you're notified when we go live, which is every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And like and comment if you have any questions. Comment in the chat. We always welcome interaction with you. This is about helping you improve your relationship. So thank you so much again for watching, Andy. Thank you again for another great conversation. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everybody.